So, last November, I was lucky enough to get invited to a video game French conference in Strasbourg that was part of the Indie Game Contest, a festival dedicated to new games made by indie developers and where you can discover some really cool creations. I was asked by East Games, the video game association in the east part of France, to give a speech on how to better organize as a solo game developer. It was my first conference ever and I absolutely loved the experience. It went really well, everyone seemed to like it, and it was amazing to be able to talk with all these incredible people from the French indie scene. But then I thought that this topic could be of interest to you girls and guys too on this channel. And since the conference was filmed, I asked East Games if they'd be okay with me reposting it over here in an English version. And obviously they said yes. So a huge thanks to Alex and Claire from East Games for their help with this. And of course, if you speak French, be sure to check out the association's YouTube channel, because they have a lot of other great conferences from this year and from the past editions of the Indie Game Contest. I also want to thank all my Patreon and YouTube members who make this kind of thing possible. In particular, huge shout out to Anthony Edward, my latest Patreon line member. And on that note, get ready to hear me redubbing myself. I hope you like it. So my name is Mina Pêcheux, and today I'm gonna talk about how you can better organize as a solo dev. Here are a few links right away if you want to find me on the net. Basically it's just my name and this logo on every platform and you should be able to find me. Okay, now, before we dive in, let me tell you briefly what I do. So, I'm a game developer and content creator, which means that I make games and I talk about games in various formats. I post online, I write technical books, I create YouTube videos. I've been doing this for quite a few years now, and what I really like is that it allows me to talk with all sorts of people and share insights about how games work and how they're made. I mostly create dev tutorials, but I also talk about 3D modeling and other stuff. But what's funny is that I didn't start out doing this. Originally, I studied maths, and so I've got an engineering degree in applied maths and computer science, and people told me to go into AI, so I did. But I got really bored, so I switched to web development, and it still wasn't as funny as making games, so I finally got to game dev. So, of course, I've been doing game dev on the side parallel to all this, but officially I began not too long ago. And now you might be thinking, okay, great, but why talk about all this, especially if it's not even about games? Well, there's a reason. It's because the term solo dev is actually quite broad. What I mean by that is that solo devs come from all sorts of backgrounds, they have unique skills, passions, and perspectives. Each solo dev in this room is an individual with their own way of approaching things, which means that everyone will have their own organization process, their own way of doing a project. So, at this point, remember that everything I'm sharing today are personal ideas and suggestions based on my own experience. They are not universal rules, sure-to-work things, or perfect solutions to the problem. You need to adapt it and find what really suits you. Now, I could end the talk here by saying, be yourself, but that's not exactly helpful. It's nice advice in theory, but it's pretty useless in practice. Especially since, as summed up by this image found on Instagram, being yourself is great, but being yourself like everyone else is easier. Cause, yeah, there are now so many established processes and steps that we have to try and fit into certain molds, unfortunately. I mean, yes, of course, we'd all love to be groundbreaking solo devs with unique ideas, revolutionary gameplay, and unprecedented artistic styles. But the video game industry has become really complex, it's now highly professionalized, and there's a lot of competition on everything. Meaning that if we want our games to have even the slightest chance of being seen and tested by players, we need to follow certain steps. So, to talk about all this, I'll draw from my experience with my first game, a 2D game with both action and puzzle modes, called Matchem. It's not out yet, but it will be released soon, next month in a couple of weeks, on December the 2nd. Just a quick interruption, Matchem is now out. It actually got released last December, as told just here, and so you can get it right now on Steam. It's available both on Windows and on Mac. Alright, and now back to the conference. So yes, this is self-promotion, just like everyone else on the stage, but I also wanted to share a real, hands-on experience rather than some vague rules about what it means to organize as a solo dev. I'll talk about how I approached this project, the questions I asked myself, and how I personally found answers. Okay, now with all this in mind, let's start by talking about to-do lists. So to-dos are great, everybody uses them, it's the foundation of any project, solo or not, that part is obvious. But they're also closely related to time management because a to-do list contains everything that needs to be done, and the question is how are we gonna find the time to do all this and carry on all the way? One question I often ask myself is how am I going to organize the items on my to-do list? With so much to do, where do I start, what should I include, and what are the priorities? To answer this, I usually sort my tasks based on two main criteria: what I like to do and what I know how to do, what I master. So all this mixed up gives us 4 categories. Things that you like and know how to do. These are really cool because they're motivating and you're pretty efficient at them. You know where you're going, what the issues are going to be, how much time you'll need, etc. So typically these are the first items that you'll add to the list because that's what you have in mind when you start the project. Then you have things that you don't enjoy or don't want to do for this project, but that you know how to do. These are within your skill set, but maybe not useful this time. And at the bottom, it's what you don't master, so what you don't know but might want to learn, this will require self-training, or what you don't know but don't really want to do. So for me, you'll see very soon that marketing isn't my thing. I'm sorry to all the market people in the room. Now, of course, quick side note, if there are tasks that you don't want to do or aren't skilled in, or any of these categories that doesn't motivate you as much, you can always consider collaborating with others, or if you got the budget, hire help. But this is a bit outside of solo dev territory, so I won't focus on that. Okay, so to sum up with these 4 categories, what's on the left is all about motivation and passion. It's what will keep us energized throughout the project. This task should make you happy, or at least I hope so. And then at the top, it's more about efficiency. With these tasks, you'll have a good idea of how it works, why it's not working, and how to optimize it. So those are slightly clearer points, a bit more reassuring. There's going to be uncertainty everywhere, but there should be a bit less on those items. So, for example, in my case, for Matchem, I love and I master the development work. I have experience with 3D, but I didn't feel like doing it for this project. I'd done some 3D stuff and I didn't feel like doing it again, but I really wanted to focus on art, graphics and interface design, even though I wasn't very familiar with all that, and I wanted to learn more. And as I mentioned, marketing is not really my strong suit, still you have to do it. So now that we have these categories, we're happy, but where do we go from there? Well, my advice is to generally start with what you like and master, because again it will be quite motivating and you know how to scope it. You know how big tasks will be, what tools to use, so it should be both reassuring and energizing, which is why it's nice to begin with. Next, I think you should quickly consider what you don't know how to do, what you want and don't want to do, because those tasks will take a big chunk of your to-do and they're hard to evaluate. You might be thinking that if you watch just one tutorial on YouTube, you'll understand this new concept, but in fact you need to watch 12 playlists before you get it. So those items will obviously be harder to manage time-wise. Again, for instance, I knew marketing was a weak point for me, and I really like anticipating. So what I did is I prepared a big list of all the posts I wanted to share on my socials for Matchem, and here you see line 60 or something, but there are over 500, and so those are all the posts I planned on doing, because I thought if I have this list, it doesn't mean I'll have to do everything, but I'll be a bit more at ease since I have sort of a plan. Similarly, I like to make videos, so I thought, well, I'll do devlog videos of my game. This way I'm re-inputting something I like into the communication part that isn't my strong suit, so this way it will be a bit lighter overall. And also, I'll talk about it more in a little while, but it forced me to look back on what I'd done, which is crucial. For the devs and the audience, another important thing, of course, is that you can automate some tasks. For example, I wrote a simple script to auto-transform some of my renders into YouTube Shorts. It's a really tedious step that I didn't want to do, so at least it was automated and I could think about something else. The last remaining category is what we know how to do but don't want to do for this project, and for me you need to rule it out or justify it. What I mean by that is that you'll have to ask yourself if for this project this type of task is absolutely necessary or not. Sometimes yes, and so you'll have to get through it, but typically in my case, with 3D, I realized that I didn't actually need it, because I quickly had this idea of a 2D abstract minimalist aesthetic for the game, and so I didn't need 3D at all, I could just ignore it completely. So here you go. These 4 categories are my way of organizing stuff on my to-dos, and thanks to those, when I start doing a to-do, I can quickly tell what will be cool to do or not, and how I'll manage my different tasks. Apart from that, there's of course some standard advice too. Because you're working on your own, you can adapt your work hours as you wish, so yes, I code at 3 in the morning because I can and no one can tell me different. Now, obviously, ideally, it can be better to try and keep normal work hours, so officially this is the real advice I should be giving you, but unofficially I don't follow it, so I won't tell you to do that. But anyway, yeah, you don't have to fit a universal system, since nobody is forcing you, and you can choose to do things the way you least dislike it. Then it can be nice to freshen your brain up. What I mean is that we can afford to switch from one task to another, to reset a bit, and avoid being completely stuck on something. Again, we can do this because we are the ones who choose what to do and when. But this has to suit you, though. I know that some people get a bit lost when switching between tasks, so it depends on each person, and it's up to you to decide. And lastly, to me, you should see if you don't feel like doing a task because it's difficult or just boring. Because that's not exactly the same. For a difficult task, you'll have to push through and overcome the obstacle, but for a boring task, you just don't have the motivation. And again, since we're working alone, we can afford to remotivate ourselves by doing something like listening to music. You don't need to show you're 100% focused in front of your screen, working and doing nothing else. You can be a bit more flexible. For example, when I need to rename files or organize a folder, I'll watch a show or put on some music, because I don't want to do it, but it has to be done, and these make the situation a bit lighter. Now, with all that said, classifying tasks is great, but we'll still always have too many of them. You'll never have the opposite problem. There's always too many ideas, too many gameplay concepts, too many artistic references that you want to include, too many topics that you want to cover. So you have to limit all that, and of course, the word that comes up here is the scope, which is crucial in game development, and the scope is the project scale, it's the number of features, their complexity, and everything related to them, like whether we need to learn something new to implement them. Now, this doesn't mean that a solo dev can only make a brick breaker clone. Many great solo developed games go far beyond that, thankfully. But you also can't aim for a AAA level game. It's about finding a balance somewhere in between, because you don't have the resources for that. So you have to choose and put priorities on your tasks. Again, there are many ways to do this. I myself use various techniques. First, I evaluate tasks based on different criteria. Are they quick or long to complete, motivating or boring, easy or difficult? Personally, and this is just me again, I prefer to start with quick tasks, even if they're a bit boring. Why? Because the boost of comfort and motivation I get from finishing them is worth doing those dull things. That's a compromise that I like, but maybe for you, it's better to dive into a big, super motivating task that provides amazing gratification when finished. Everyone has their approach, but I think these criteria are a good way to assess task complexity for yourself. Another pretty well-known trick is to work incrementally. So this is the classical must-have, nice-to-have, could-have. The first one, the must-have, is what absolutely needs to exist. Without it, it's simply not the project that you thought. This is the core DNA of your project, and if it's missing, you just haven't made your game. The nice-to-have is about the additional features that enhance the user experience, or on the communication side, it's everything that grows your reach and audience. Because, of course, yes, all of these applies to everything, not just the development. And finally, the could-have is the icing on the cake, like Steam achievements or cool visual effects, like when you shoot a bullet and you get all those great VFX and sounds. So all those extras that give more appeal to your game and place it better in the video game ecosystem. So those are really cool. Now, usually, I prefer not to do everything in one go, I rather work in passes. So first, I'm gonna build a global skeleton with all the must-have elements, and then I go back over it and refine as I go. This way, I'm doing everything at the same time, and there is less chance that a super important task gets completely forgotten because I ran out of time. Another technique I like is the zoom approach. So again, it's all about planning ahead. Sorry, you're gonna hear that a lot. But so often I start by considering big phases. For example, for this game I began in summer and I knew I wanted to release it in winter. I wanted it to be a short-term project that would ship quickly to fill my portfolio. So I decided that I'd split my time roughly in half, a few months for the development and a few months for marketing, feedback and improvements. So this was my bird's eye view of the project. And then the idea is to go more into the details, like here for the development, I had already a good idea of my game modes of Matchem, I won't talk about it too much, but basically you see that we have the prototype part that should be quite important, because I'll come back to it very soon, but this is a key step in any project. And so after that I had my various game modes. Note that I could somewhat evaluate the complexity of each one because I'd already worked on these kind of things in the past, so again it's about experience, but in truth this is all uncertain and everything always takes longer than expected, but that's okay. For feedback and marketing, I knew that I wanted to share my game with my friends first, and then move on to my YouTube community and audience. So that was my overall plan, and it was a bit reassuring for me to have it written down, even though, of course, I haven't followed it to a T, but yeah, at least it exists, and I can pretend to be organized in this presentation slide. But anyways, one crucial point, no matter how you organize, is to be able to clearly say if you've finished a task or not. This sounds really silly, but it's essential, because if the task is vaguely defined, you won't know if it's really done and if you can cross it out. So if you define your task clearly, meaning with a clear goal, it doesn't have to be metrics or KPIs, I don't fall in this system, but if you say clearly that when you click on this button, it does this action, for example, then you'll be able to stay flexible, and if you take a detour, still be able to check if you implemented what you wanted. Plus, you also have a specific goal to reach. It won't be a vague, 2 weeks long feature that's hard to evaluate, it will be a precise yes or no check of whether or not the button does what it's supposed to. So, to me, this is super important because we can easily drift away. And last but not least, perfectionism. That's an issue we all have, no matter what job we do, we all want our creations to be as perfect as possible, and yet they'll never be because we can always go further. Especially now with live games that can be updated and fixed on Steam even after they've been released. This means that we'll never have something perfect, and so even if it's hard to accept, and I struggle to accept it too, you have to stop at one point and push forward on the rest. And perhaps you can come back to it later and improve it in a second pass. Because perfectionism takes time, it can complicate things, and more importantly, it can have you lose motivation. And I think that motivation is one of the hardest resources to manage as a solo dev, along with time and money, of course. Why? Because making a game is super hard. You have to do a lot of jobs at the same time, and a solo game is often about a passion, something we really care about. Except that you're on your own, which, on the one hand, means that no one's here to yell at you, but on the other hand also means that no one's here to remotivate you. So you have to remotivate yourself. Plus, keep in mind that you might work on pretty unclear tasks, especially if you define them poorly, so basically you'll often find yourself pushing forward towards some big faraway goal, wondering where you're really going, what you're doing, and if you've arrived to where you intended. Add to that you constantly have to make choices. That's the same in any project, of course, but as a solo dev, you have to take every decision on every topic. It can be choosing a tool, or choosing whether you'll do this task next Tuesday or next Wednesday. Basically, you'll make choices at many levels and all the time. Except that choosing is difficult. First, you have the famous paralysis of choice, where if you have too many possibilities, it becomes impossible to decide which one to go with and you get stuck. For example, when you decide to make a game, it can be on any topic, with any technique, any game engine, so that's great, but what do? You have so many possibilities, it's hard to pick one. And also, choosing causes a mental fatigue. I'll talk about it further when I tell you about my management tools, but I know that things like Kanban and task cards often block me, because I'm like, okay, but which color do I pick for this card? I know that nobody cares, but I still have this thought and I have to choose, and it adds to the overall fatigue. So yeah, this weight of the decision is real. And when you add to that the fact that you're on your own, feeling like the whole project rests on your shoulders, not sure if it will succeed on Steam, etc., you can quickly blow a fuse. But keep cool. To me, the essential thing is to remain healthy and to avoid burnouts. This is crucial because it's easy to think that, yes, it's my passion, that's why I spend 25 hours a day on it, it's normal. But actually it isn't. You still need to find a balance. A balance between what? Between working on areas where you struggle, because yes, there will be obstacles even in things you master, there will always be hiccups and bad surprises, so you'll have to work through that. And taking the time to boost yourself by achieving small victories. So it's often related to the things that you like, the tasks that motivate you, that were in the categories on the left of my table earlier. And it's super important because it's what will re-energize you to keep going. And for that, I find that it's nice to work on short tasks, because no matter how much you love doing something, you'll eventually get tired of it. Your brain reaches its saturation point. So your motivation, shown here with this blue arrow, will go down gradually. And when you do short tasks, you'll frequently have these little boosts of encouragement that will motivate you to tackle the next one. That's why I think that defining clear, manageable tasks is key to maintaining progress and avoiding burnout. I find it the best way to keep going and not drift away too far, thinking that you'll never make it because it takes you 3 months to finish a single to-do list item. But, so, to know if you've finished a task, it's important to visualize your accomplishments well. For example, a simple thing can be, when you finish your item on a to-do list, to check it off or cross it out instead of erasing it. It's silly, but it's much more rewarding. It shows you that you actually did this task and it didn't just vanish into thin air like magic. Another idea can be to celebrate your milestones, like the first time someone plays your game, your first feedback from a friend, your first feedback from not a friend, because we know it's a bit different, your first positive feedback, your first wishlist addition, your first playtest, etc. All of those things are proof that as a human being you're evolving and improving, and that as a solo developer you're learning an absolute incredible amount of things. And actually, speaking of first, let's talk about the prototype, so your first test, your first phase. It's an essential example in many aspects, and in particular in terms of motivation. Why? Because the prototype is the first building block. It's the stage where you decide if the project is worth pursuing. And so that's when you define core gameplay elements, the most fundamental and shortest loop that will repeat everywhere. In Mario, for example, it's the fact that you can jump and that it's enjoyable to do. If these base actions aren't fun, it's going to be really hard to build a fun game around them. For reference, that's what Jesse Shell, in his book on game design, calls the toy versus the game, which is everything else that you build around it. The toy is all those base mechanics. And this book is really good, you should really read it. And so, the prototype also captures your initial burst of motivation. This excitement at 11 PM on a Sunday evening, when you're talking to a friend and you think, I absolutely have to make this game. So that's when you'll start working on your prototype, and that's when you have to be careful not to lose your motivation instantly, because it could stop you right there in your tracks. That's why, to me, a good thing to keep this initial motivation is to use your favorite tool. And here I'm using the term tool in a very broad sense. I personally have the chance that my favorite tool is coding, which we use to implement games, but if you prefer, it could be little pieces of paper, for example, to check what happens when, I don't know, like you play this card and you do this damage to the enemy, and then the enemy strikes back. The idea is just to have a first visualization, a first draft of what your game loop could look like. It can even just be a mood board with plenty of game references, and you have this feature that you like in this game, this aesthetic that you like in this other one, and so on. So yeah, these tools can be very diverse. The important part is just to reduce the initial friction and the loss of motivation as much as possible, because this phase determines if you'll keep going. And one last point. Of course, we love creating stuff, and we don't want to stop. We think that we have to work and develop our game all the time, otherwise we'll never release it. But sometimes you have to take a step back and take a bit of time to look back. It's not easy to do, but it's necessary. You can do these retrospectives every week, or every 2 weeks, or every month, whatever works for you, but it's what will allow you to appreciate everything that you've learned, actually implemented, and decided. Because, once again, these 3 points might seem obvious. Yes, if you're making a project, you do all of this, but all of this is actually super complex. And if you make a list of everything that you've done, you're going to realize that you've accomplished a bunch of stuff and that you've learned plenty of things. Any dev on any game, even if they're remaking a Pong, discovers an incredible amount. That's the crazy part. It's not just about the scope of the project. Any project that you decide to do will teach you things about yourself, or the industry, or a tool. For example, earlier I was talking about my devlogs, which were great, because in order to tell my audience about the game, I had to stop and ask myself, okay, what did I do in these past 2 weeks? And so I actually have a list of all my progress, and it was super cool to realize that every time I had new screenshots to show, I could discuss a brand new concept or mechanic, or talk about how here I kinda screwed up, but managed to fix it afterwards. So yeah, it was really nice. Of course, I'm not saying that you have to make videos and publish them on YouTube, but you should still make this list just for yourself, it will really help you. And obviously, try and focus more on the positives, what went well, rather than everything that's still left to do, because again, this to-do list is endless, since we're all perfectionists. Yeah, that's the biggest flaw, you can say that in your next job interview. So yeah, you should focus more on the good things, and this can be very cool. Okay, so we're talking about retrospectives, which leads us to testing, QA, and feedback, because yeah, at one point you'll have to ask other people what they think of your game. Of course, it's hard, because you'll feel like it's your baby, and others will say mean things, and actually, yeah, they probably will, even your friends. But you'll still have to share your game at one point, because you'll simply be too involved in the project, and you won't be able to evaluate the game objectively anymore. So you'll either think it's the best game in the world and you don't get why nobody likes it, or you'll think that it's useless and you should stop right now. You're simply too involved. So you have to get out of your head and ask other people for their feedback. Because it's not because you're solo that you have to do everything solo, especially not your tests and QA. What I mean by this is that we're lucky to be in an ecosystem where lots of people can help us. For example, there are other creators that you'll meet in events like this one or on the Discord and the Twitch streams. All these people know video games, they create some themselves, and so they'll have plenty of useful advice for you. and don't worry, they're nicer than you think behind their big beards. Then you also have your future players, and here I'm talking about your actual target audience, which obviously should better enjoy your game. So it's important to know what these players think early in the dev process before finishing your game, otherwise you'll find yourself in a bind. Check if they think it's interesting, or maybe if it's funnier to other people, in which case you may have to shift your target audience criteria. But in any case, at one point you'll have to get feedback from all these people, plus your friends, and perhaps even people who don't know anything about video games and who can give you a more naive, surprising feedback with super different references, which can teach a lot. And finally, the community. So it can be your own community if you're on some platforms and you already have a following, or more globally, the video game community, because players always enjoy playing games, so they'll test you and give you feedback. Though a bit of caution on this, because the feedback won't always be as nice as you'd like, so I believe you should wait a bit to be really sure of what you want to do before you share it publicly. I prefer to start with friends, then ask other creators, and once I'm clear on what I'm making and I can defend it, I ask the players in the community for real. This way, even if the feedback is a bit harsh, I'm ready to roll with the punches. Okay, now with all that in mind, so far I mainly focused on process, so let's wrap it up quickly with a small section on my tools. The goal is not to give you a comprehensive list, it's just so that you have the names, and if you're curious, you can ask me more questions today during the event. So I'm gonna talk about my management tools, but here there are some heavy quotes on this word, because you'll quickly see that my management is, well... So earlier I mentioned Kanban and card-based organization, and I'm not actually gonna talk about this because I don't use it. So yeah, I can give you names like Trello, ClickUp, Monday, Notion, or even Codex. All of these tools can be super cool, but I don't use them. And I don't use them because they don't match with my solo dev pipeline. Again, when I'm on my own, it takes me too much time to manage the project relative to the motivation it gives me to have a card turn blue when the task is done. To me, that's not worth it. Okay, so what do I use? Well, I use this, a huge to-do list. So you can't read anything here, because there's just too much, that's normal, but if you look over here on the right, this is the whole file. So yes, there's a lot, and you're probably looking at this thinking, okay, it's a to-do? No, why do I do it this way? Because, again, I don't have to make decisions like choosing the color for my task card. It sounds trivial, but when I add a task, there's no decision-making friction about how to enter it. That's the point, it eliminates that friction of managing my project. So I have this large to-do list, organized with tasks that are validated, cancelled, or pending, though I do have those nice colors, thanks to the To-Do Plus plugin for VS Code. So yeah, there you go, that's my whole management system, one VS Code plugin. Now, on a larger scale, I also use, wait for it, a calendar. I know it's getting technical. So, for example, here you see my October calendar for Matchem, where I had everything related to communication listed. Again, I planned this because it's the area I was least confident about. I've improved with this project, but this is where I had a lot of uncertainty. So I thought if I anticipate, I'll be more at ease. So I planned my devlogs, their release dates, all my social media posts, and the major updates for the game. And at the bottom right in greenish, you see the first YouTube short, and all of this keeps going throughout November. So this is all I did for Matchem during this month. It allowed me to visualize what to do, and then during my retrospectives to check what I had accomplished, while keeping everything condensed in one calendar. And well, that's about it. That's how I organize my solo projects. And then I go and give talks about organizing as a solo dev with a to-do list and a calendar. But yeah, of course there are plenty of great tools out there, like Kanban boards. They can be a fantastic solution if they work for you. I think the key is just to test and see if it motivates or drains you. At least that's usually the question that I ask myself. Regarding feedback, as I said before, it's important to talk to people, creators, players, etc. A classic method is to use a Discord server or a form. For Matchem, I used a Google form with 6 or so questions to gather feedback on the different modes and general impressions. On that topic, the critical point is reaching the right people. Because for those who get the reference, sometimes you think it's the right people, and in fact, it's not the right people. So you need to find your community. If you're a content creator like me, you probably already know the platforms where you're active. If not, it can be a Discord server, a Reddit place, or similar spaces. The point is to identify where your followers and target audience are in majority. Also, I'd advise against seeking feedback too early because you have to know what questions to ask. It's a bit different with a Discord server, but for example, for my form, at first I was like, okay, should I just ask people what they thought of the game? This would give really unclear results. So, in fact, I first asked my friends in this global way, and then I used their answers, what they liked or didn't like, to refine my questions for the form. This way, thanks to those rough feedbacks, I could actually refine the questions in my form. And this way I could actually analyze the answers. Because, of course, it's nice to ask questions to people, but you have to be able to do something with the data you get back. That's why, to me, you shouldn't get going with this feedback phase too early in your process, like week 2 of your development, and ask people, I've got a new idea for a roguelike card game named Bada Thing, what do you think? Because this won't give you any useful data to analyze. Finally, for marketing, I'm really not an expert. For content creation, I use tools like those ones, so Inkscape, VS Code, OBS, etc., to make videos and illustrations? I feel like using this word would be really insulting to real designers, so let's say that I make visual stuff for my socials. And so then I share them basically everywhere, in hope of reaching people. It works a little, but it's very basic. And of course we can talk about it more after the conference if you're interested, but again, I'm far from a marketing prodigy, so I recommend reaching out to people in this audience who are way more knowledgeable than I am on this topic. But in any case, I think I was pretty quick, I'm not sure what time it is, but I thank you all for your attention. I hope you find this presentation helpful, and here's this slide back with a QR code for my Jam Steam page if you want to wishlist, test, and give me some extra feedback on the game. I've also recalled all my social links here, and yeah, anyway, feel free to ask questions.
First of all, thank you very much. It was really good, and I agree with you on a lot of points. I'll have a question in a second, but I just wanted to add something first regarding feedback, because I personally had an experience where I participated in playtests at Focus, and it helped me a lot in understanding the expectations and questions you can ask about ergonomics, environment and gameplay readability, etc. For example, I'm colorblind, and I could discuss with them a lot of improvements. Now, my game is in black and white, so that's not really an issue, but I think many companies do semi-open playtests, and I really recommend looking at other games and seeing how it works in other studios. Not necessarily to learn from these other studios' processes, but just to learn about questions and expectations. And so, now, my question. Overall, I organize myself a bit like you when it comes to planning my development or deciding on priorities. But I struggle to maintain a good work-life balance. Since I work from home, sometimes I can spend 3 weeks working on my project 24/7. But then I'll have 2 months where I don't do anything. I'm pretty stressed out by timetables, so all the planning things you do with your calendar, for example, aren't my thing. Would you have more advice?
So you might need to ask someone else, because I also spend 3 weeks non-stop on a game and then do nothing. But more seriously, I think what you need to do is determine where you're at energy-wise. To me, it's not bad in itself to work on something for 3 weeks straight, unless at the end of these 3 weeks you're completely drained and you can't do anything anymore. Because I think if after these 3 weeks you're totally out, it means that this wasn't the right rhythm for you. and maybe you should have stopped after 2 weeks. And in that case, typically something silly but worth remembering is that you're allowed to play video games. It sounds stupid to say, but I've talked about it with a handful of people, and we all have this idea that when we're creating a game, if we're doing something else for even a second, we should feel guilty. And so we force ourselves to work 24/7, which is not required and isn't actually really recommended. So yeah, for example, playing video games is usually less tiring, unless you're doing a run of Hades in hardcore mode with hit 64 maybe, but that's up to you. And I think that this can be a good way to freshen up your brain, as I was saying earlier, but also sometimes to rethink your own ideas in another way, by looking at other stuff and seeing things that you could readapt, but in a cooler setting. Don't go into it in full analysis mode, just play and have fun to recharge your batteries. Of course, it depends on your passions too. For example, if you play an instrument, you can say, okay, today, no matter what, I'll just play the guitar for 8 hours and get out of this completely. I think it's all about knowing yourself and your limits. So again, that varies from person to person, but at first, you might need to just test yourself and see if you just went too far. So hopefully you won't get to the burnout stage, obviously, but you have to learn more about yourself and feel when you're reaching your limits and ask yourself, what can I do now to shift my focus? And now for the second part of your question, about how to then come back to your project after 2 months wondering what you were working on at the time. It's clear that being organized is a plus, since, for example, here I had milestones of what I'd done previously. And also I like to document my work a lot. In this case, of course, I had my devlog videos, which was really cool because I literally had a whole video to record what I was doing last time. So this was great, but it's obviously a somewhat special case. But yeah, you can just take some notes about what you've just done and what you want to do next, and then you put this note in big letters so that it's the first thing that shows when you reopen the project. This way, when you come back, you've got your note that instantly tells you what you're supposed to do, and again, this helps reduce the decision friction. But again, it depends on what you like, and if you don't like plannings, because they stress you out, it becomes a bit hard for me to give you advice on how to plan without plannings.
No, but what you're saying is really interesting because I also manage to play games without feeling too guilty. I take notes and everything, but I'm not overly intense about it. But yeah, it can be smart to see this as work and as a transition back to my project. To see that by playing games, I'm still working mentally and linking back to my project.
Well, actually, any solo dev who's playing is also working, because honestly, we can't really switch off our brains. Even someone who's just curious about the games has a more critical view, an analysis. I think many of us have had this kind of moment where you're playing and you have a wow effect, like you're casting a spell and it feels super fun, and so you have to know why it works. And you see there's the effects, there's the sound, there's the little screen shake. It doesn't happen every time, but yeah, your brain can switch to analysis mode really quickly, even if you don't realize it.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I had a question about the prototype and how you decide to keep going or completely abort a project, because I think I'm not the only one to have a disc that looks a bit like Sid's closet in Toy Story, you know, with ugly toys that you play with for 2 seconds, and it's super fun, and in the end, you store them in there and forget all about them because they're not that great. So, how do you pass the stage of, it's not that great? What are your criteria? You said earlier you could send it to friends, for example. What kind of reactions are you looking for?
To me, the main thing is whether it's fun or not. It's silly, but it's something that appears really quickly, but that is a very blurry feedback. People will tell you if they got bored or they don't see any novelty. I think if the first comment is about technical stuff, it means they didn't even think of telling you it was fun, so it probably wasn't. That's also why sometimes I have my games tested by people who never played games before, because it gives me very quickly a feel for this fun. Of course, it's very intangible, it's not a number or some analytics, but yeah, it's about this feeling of whether or not the game has potential to grab the eye. I think you should try to attract people who don't know a lot about games and get the attention of players, because the attention is the hardest thing to have nowadays with players. They have so many possibilities. I mean, we all have our big backlogs that have about the same size as your closet of prototypes, so yeah, it depends a bit on who's testing, but for me the question is, did the person who played your prototype want to stick around, or did they open it because it's a friend who sent it, but they really wanted to close it after 2 minutes? I think that's the whole thing. If you want to keep playing, it means there's potential. But that's really difficult to determine because people hardly tell you that. They'll tell you if it was boring and they stopped. So I'd say that in my experience, if they don't say too much about how fun it was, it's a good sign.
Maybe just as a note on feedback, I think participating in game jams and then having streamers play your games live can be great. There's a lot of things people will forget to tell you, but you have their reactions directly as they're playing, so it's amazing. So yeah, if you have an opportunity to see friends play your game, rather than just having their feedback, it's always really cool.
So yes, on that topic, that's totally true. There's plenty that people just won't think of writing in feedback that will be readable simply in their behavior. And so you're absolutely right that streamers can teach you a lot on how your game will get perceived. Because no one will write that around minute 47, I really liked it because there was a nice effect in the menu. You'll just see it on their face, because they like it. But they won't write it down. So yeah, for many things, it can be nice to have the opportunity to see someone play, and without giving them any instructions. Like, I really hope you'll like it at minute 47. Otherwise, they'll have a compulsion to find something, and plus here they'll probably be disappointed because it's just a menu animation. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
First of all, many thanks for the presentation and thanks for the YouTube videos. They helped me a lot during my studies. I had a question about the early stages of production because I tend to really go in dozens of directions at the same time. So it's a bit messy because now I have like 36 projects to do at the same time, and I need to learn more on some topic and also do this game. So how do you manage to focus on just one project? For example, I'm currently developing a game with a friend, and in parallel, I want to get better in various areas like programming. But it's a different thing, so I don't know how to focus my time on just a single project and really separate stuff.
So again, I might have to ask someone else on stage, because I actually do that too. In fact, that's a pretty complex question, because it comes back to the problem of managing your energy. I think what could be nice is to try and give you sort of MVP, so minimum viable products, as goals. Meaning you could try to aim for a first step in your project that is satisfactory to you. So it won't be finished, of course, but typically it could be a first working prototype. And so you don't stop working on this project until you've reached this step. For self-learning, you could say that you want to watch a given playlist entirely, and so then you watch it at the right pace for you to understand the information, obviously. The point is not to speedrun through it, but you have to watch all of it before you can work on something else. If that's your weak point, I think giving yourself goals like this can be a cool technique. It's a bit like quests in a video game, and your reward would be that you finish this task, so now you're allowed to keep exploring the rest of this open world we call life and test something else. But yeah, I do have the same problem. I keep on switching between projects. Plus I also have the YouTube videos to do at the same time, so I don't know if I'm the best person to ask. So stop asking me questions like this. All the bad things you do, I do them too, it's just that I do them from a stage and I pretend that I know what I'm doing. But yeah, more seriously, I think setting goals like this could be helpful to you.
Thanks for this presentation as well. I wanted to know, is it the first game you're creating solo?
Yep.
Okay, and so that's something that you've wanted to do for a long time.
Because you said that you had different moments in your dev life that you didn't like too much, and so you wanted to reorient.
So yeah, initially I didn't study game dev, but I've been developing games on the side for 18 years now, so that's way too much, that's really scary. But so yeah, since I've been a kid, like a lot of people, I've had this dream of making a game, and it's gonna be incredible, like World of Warcraft but in space. And then you do that for a couple of hours and you can't stand it anymore, so you decide that you'll refocus on a tic-tac-toe, but even that is pretty hard to do. So yes, just like Vivien was asking a question earlier, I also have a bunch of prototypes, but this was my first game, and that's why I said before I wanted to ship it quite quickly. In fact, my goal here was to start exploring the different steps of solo dev production. Have my game actually be on Steam, be a real published game. But I didn't go through all the early access or next phase stuff, because I knew that if I went there, the game would simply never be released, and it would remain in some larval stage, and in between where I'm like, now you know it's finished, but there are still bugs. So yeah, I decided to try and keep it fairly simple. Well, if you want, we can talk about my game afterwards, and you'll see it's still crazy, but anyway. I tried to ship it quickly, to have this first item in my portfolio, and be truly able to say that I'm a game dev. Because for years I've been saying that I'm a game dev without having published a single game, which was a bit embarrassing. So yeah, it was my first game, and here the goal was just to have it actually exist. But yeah, after that I've got a lot of other ideas, with perhaps more potential, that could allow me to discover more steps of the production process and go further. So I hope this answers your question. I don't quite remember what it was, sorry.
Are there any other questions?
I'll take this opportunity because it could benefit everyone. From the prototype to the pre-production and production stages, there's a world of difference. How do you define when the prototyping phase is finished, if the prototype is done, or advanced enough to go on with a more polished phase in your project?
Well, it sort of goes back to what Vivien was asking earlier. I'd say it's about this moment when it feels fun, when you have a complete game loop. I'm gonna quote myself here, but my first devlog is actually named number 1, the prototype. And so what did I show inside this video? My first tests were... so I don't know if I can go back in my slides, it's gonna be a bit far away, sorry. I'm gonna be quick, I know you're hungry, I can see it in your eyes. Okay, so those are the final 4 game modes, but at first I didn't have that. I had only this one, that in the end became just a training mode. So basically, I just had my core idea where you have an avatar that can take 4 geometric shapes and 4 colors, and it needs to go through gates with the same shape and color. That was my main idea. And so I'm not going to say that I made a vertical slice, that would be a bit overkill, but in short, I tried to go further by adding some VFX, a few sounds, etc., to see if it could be fun. And so I got to a point that wasn't incredible, but was starting to be a bit fun to play. Like, you'd pass through a gate, and you'd want to pass through one more. And in fact, the moment I realized it could be worth it is when a friend of mine played and had this feeling of, I want more. I saw that my core idea of passing through gates was working and fun, and so I should continue the project. I had the chance to get out of prototyping pretty quickly, because I could develop this prototype rapidly and also get a first feedback quickly. Because yeah, of course, if it takes you a month and a half to have a first reaction, it's going to delay everything else. But so I had this chance, plus I went for an art style that I'm sure designers will all envy. It's pretty amazing in terms of visuals, I know, but so yeah, it was suited to my own art skills. I don't know how to draw except for shapes in Inkscape, so I made the game with that. So yeah, obviously creating assets was fairly quick, and so mixed with the fact that I'd already developed this kind of thing before, the prototype was pretty quick to do. And to me the key moment where I decided it could work was when this friend of mine said to me via Discord, "Okay, I got one, wait, I'll do just one more." And I thought, alright, that's cool, let's go. But again, this is a pretty intangible feedback. You need to feel whether there is potential for fun, but this isn't quantifiable. I mean, just try and ask someone, what is your current potential for fun? You'll see you won't get a lot of answers and it won't be very useful. But yeah, that's the whole trick. As soon as you mention it, it might disappear. It's a very dangerous and elusive animal. Hey, thanks for staying throughout the whole conference. I really hope you enjoyed it. Again, don't forget that if you're a French speaker, there are more on East Games channel, and other than that, if you want to get more content about game creation, you can subscribe to my channel. I've got quite a lot of new ideas for this new year, so be sure to turn on your notifications to not miss anything. And as always, thanks a lot for watching, and take care.